At 0640 on June 6, 1944, in the fields behind Omaha Beach, a German corporal from the 352nd Infantry Division pressed himself into a shallow foxhole and listened to a sound he did not understand. It was not the slow, deliberate
If you want more content like this, subscribe now and comment below.
crack of bolt-action rifles he had known since Poland and Russia. It was not the long, ripping burst of a machine gun. It was something in between, sharp, fast, and relentless. Bang, 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 bang. 8 shots in just a few seconds. Then a metallic ping. Then 8 more. Through the smoke and dust, American infantry were climbing the bluffs, and their rifles were firing so quickly that the corporal later said it seemed as if every man carried a light machine gun. That impression was repeated again and again by German soldiers who fought the Americans in North Africa, Italy, France, Belgium, and Germany itself. In post-war interviews, battlefield reports, and memoirs, many German veterans described the same unsettling realization. U.S. infantry units put out an extraordinary amount of fire. The Americans were not always the most experienced soldiers. They were not always the best fieldcraft experts. But when fighting began, their weapons produced a volume of accurate fire that forced even veteran German troops to rethink what they were facing. This is the story of what German soldiers noticed about U.S. infantry weapons in combat, and why those observations revealed one of the most important advantages the United States brought to the battlefields of the Second World War. At first glance, German infantry appeared better armed. The standard German rifle was the Carabiner 98K, a strong and accurate weapon firing the powerful 7.9257 mm cartridge. German doctrine centered on the superb MG42, whose blistering rate of fire could dominate an entire sector. German officers believed that riflemen existed mainly to support the machine gun. In theory, this gave German squads tremendous firepower, but theory and practice were not always the same. Machine guns were devastating when properly positioned and supplied, yet riflemen still carried bolt-action weapons that required the shooter to manually cycle the bolt after each shot. A skilled soldier could fire rapidly, but not nearly as fast as a self-loading rifle. In the chaos of close combat, that difference mattered. The most important clue in this investigation lies in a single weapon, the M1 Garand. The M1 Garand changed the rhythm of infantry combat. F_Garand, F_ and bolt action, detch. Instead of lifting the rifle, pulling back the bolt, pushing it forward, and reacquiring the target after every shot, an American infantryman simply pressed the trigger again. Gas pressure cycled the action automatically. 8 rounds sat in an en-bloc clip. In practiced hands, all 8 could be fired in just a few seconds. German soldiers noticed this immediately. General Fritz Bayerlein, who commanded Panzer Lehr Division in Normandy, later remarked that American infantry possessed an unusually high volume of rifle fire. Veterans from the Eastern Front, accustomed to facing large numbers of Soviet troops armed mainly with bolt-action rifles, were struck by how quickly American squads responded when engaged. The metallic ping made when the empty clip ejected became one of the most famous sounds of the war. Much has been written about whether German soldiers exploited this sound to attack while the rifle was being reloaded. In reality, combat was usually too chaotic for such split-second reactions. What mattered was what came before the ping. 8 fast shots that forced enemy soldiers to keep their heads down. Near St. El in July 1944, hedgerow fighting often took place at ranges of less than 50 meters. Visibility was poor. Reactions had to be immediate. German soldiers peering over earthen banks were met not by one carefully aimed shot, but by a sudden stream of semi-automatic fire. Many reported that American squads seemed larger than they actually were. The Garand created the illusion of numbers. The second piece of evidence was the Browning automatic rifle, better known as the bar. The bar had been introduced during the First World War, but in the Second World War it became the backbone of American squad firepower. Weighing about 19 pounds, it fired the same .30-06 cartridge as the Garand from a 20-round magazine. It was not as fast as the MG-42, and it lacked quick change barrels, but it was portable, rugged, and could be fired from the shoulder, hip, or prone position. German soldiers respected the bar because it appeared everywhere. Unlike heavier machine guns that needed crews and careful setup, the bar moved with the squad. When American infantry advanced, the bar moved with them. When they defended, the bar was already in place. Its steady automatic fire pinned enemy troops while riflemen maneuvered. In the dense woods near Hürtgen Forest in November 1944, firefights were short and violent. The bar excelled in these conditions. German soldiers often could not identify whether they were facing one automatic rifle or several. Combined with Garands, the effect was continuous pressure. A German soldier who exposed himself for even a moment risked being hit by a rapid burst. The third clue in the mystery was the American approach to submachine guns. The Thompson submachine gun, and later the M3 submachine gun, were common among officers, NCOs, scouts, and engineers. Firing pistol ammunition, they were effective at short range, especially in towns and forests. German troops were already familiar with submachine guns such as the MP-40. What surprised them was how American units distributed weapons according to battlefield roles. Squad leaders and specialists often carried compact automatic weapons, increasing close-range firepower exactly where command and movement were taking place. During house-to-house fighting in Aachen in October 1944, these weapons were especially dangerous. A German defender holding a staircase or doorway might survive the initial grenade blast, only to face a burst of .45 caliber rounds the moment Americans entered the room. The fourth and perhaps most underestimated weapon was the Browning M1919 machine gun. This belt-fed machine gun did not have the terrifying buzzsaw sound of the MG-42, but German soldiers learned not to underestimate it. Reliable and accurate, the M1919 provided sustained fire from platoon positions and vehicle mounts. American units also had large quantities of ammunition and strong logistical support, allowing machine gunners to fire generously when needed. In defensive actions around Bastogne during December 1944, M1919 crews laid down disciplined fire that cut apart infantry attacks. German veterans often commented that American machine guns were not as mechanically impressive as the MG-42, but they were consistently present, well supplied, and integrated into a larger system of support. That larger system forms the next piece of evidence. American infantry weapons did not operate alone. They were part of a network that included radios, mortars, artillery, and abundant ammunition. This meant that even when German troops believed they had identified and suppressed one weapon, more fire could arrive within minutes. The M260 IM mortar and M181 IM mortar were highly effective. German soldiers feared these weapons because they were accurate, responsive, and closely coordinated with frontline units. Mortar shells often arrived just as American riflemen increased their fire, trapping defenders under a combination of bullets and explosions. At Battle of the Bulge, German units advancing through forests discovered that even isolated American platoons could quickly call in supporting fire. What began as a small firefight often escalated into a barrage of mortars and artillery. German veterans repeatedly noted that American infantry seemed to have heavy weapons available at all times. This leads to a crucial finding in our investigation. German soldiers were not reacting to a single weapon. They were reacting to a complete combat system. An American rifle squad in 1944 typically included multiple Garands, one-bar grenades, and often attachment from machine gun or mortar teams. Leaders communicated effectively and were trained to coordinate fire and movement. Ammunition was plentiful. Replacement parts were plentiful. Weapons were standardized and dependable. When such a squad opened fire, the result was greater than the sum of its parts. In Normandy's Bocage country, German defenders hidden behind thick hedgerows often expected to stop attacks with well-placed machine guns. Instead, American squads delivered rapid semi-automatic fire while bar gunners pinned likely positions. Rifle grenades and hand grenades followed. Tanks and tank destroyers added direct fire. Mortars landed behind defensive lines. What seemed at first to be a simple infantry assault became a layered and relentless attack. German soldiers noticed another detail: American weapons were remarkably rugged. The Garand functioned in mud, rain, dust, and cold. The bar tolerated hard use. The M1919 was durable and straightforward to maintain. In long campaigns, reliability mattered as much as raw performance. A weapon that fired every time inspired confidence and allowed aggressive tactics. On the frozen slopes near Elsenborn Ridge in December 1944, U.S. sustained fire suggested confidence, strength, and overwhelming resources. There was also the question of marksmanship. German veterans did not always rate American soldiers as superior individual shots. Many considered them competent rather than exceptional. But they observed that the semi-automatic Garand reduced the penalty for a missed first shot. An American rifleman could correct and fire again almost instantly. In practical terms, this increased hit probability during fast-moving combat. The same principle applied across the squad. If one man missed, others were firing at the same time. The target faced overlapping streams of bullets. In close engagements, this often mattered more than perfect precision. German officers studying combat reports came to recognize this. The firepower of U.S. rifle squads forced defenders to keep their heads down, reducing their own accuracy and making maneuver more difficult. Once suppressed, they became vulnerable to flanking movements, grenades, and supporting fire. In urban fighting, American shotguns occasionally appeared, especially with military police and specialized troops. While not common enough to define U.S. infantry doctrine, these weapons left strong impressions at close range. German accounts from house-clearing operations mention the sudden and devastating effect of buckshot in confined spaces. Then there was the M1 Carbine. Some historians debate its stopping power, but many American officers, radiomen, and support personnel appreciated its lightweight and 15-round magazine. German soldiers encountered it frequently and recognized it as another semi-automatic weapon that contributed to the overall impression of rapid fire. By 1945, some American units also fielded the M2 Carbine, capable of automatic fire. Though less common, it added even more close-range firepower during the final battles in Germany. The investigation becomes even more revealing when we examine captured weapons. German soldiers sometimes used American arms when ammunition was available. The Garand was particularly valued. Men who had fought with bolt-action rifles for years quickly understood the advantage of firing 8 aimed shots without working a bolt. Captured BARs were also appreciated for their portability and hard-hitting cartridge. This practical adoption is telling. Soldiers rarely risk carrying unfamiliar equipment unless it offers real benefits. The willingness of some German troops to use American weapons was a quiet admission of respect. Not every American weapon was superior in every category. The MG-42 remained one of the most formidable machine guns of the war. The Kar-98K was highly accurate. German assault rifles, such as the Sturmgewehr 44, pointed toward the future of infantry combat. Yet the St. G-44 arrived too late and in too few numbers to transform the entire army. The true American advantage was scale. The United States equipped millions of soldiers with reliable semi-automatic rifles and supported them with a vast industrial and logistical system. What German soldiers noticed on the battlefield was the direct result of that industrial power. General Omar Bradley once described infantry as the arm that ultimately seized and held ground. German soldiers facing U.S. infantry came to understand that these were not merely riflemen with good equipment. They were the leading edge of a nation able to turn factories, shipping, training, and doctrine into battlefield dominance. In March 1945, as American troops crossed the Rhine, many German units were exhausted and under strength. Yet veterans later said that the basic impression remained unchanged from Normandy and Tunisia. American infantry weapons generated steady, aggressive fire, and that fire was backed by ammunition that seemed limitless. When post-war interviewers asked German soldiers what stood out about the Americans, answers varied. Some mentioned artillery, some mentioned trucks, tanks, or aircraft. But when they spoke specifically about infantry combat, a common theme emerged. The Americans shot fast. They shot often. And they did not seem to stop. That observation was not propaganda. It was an honest battlefield assessment. The M1 Garand gave ordinary riflemen a practical edge over bolt-action opponents. The bar ensured each squad carried mobile automatic fire. Submachine guns strengthened close combat leadership. The M1919 added sustained support. Mortars and artillery multiplied the effect. Reliable weapons and abundant ammunition allowed all of it to continue under the worst conditions. No single weapon explains the fear and respect many German soldiers felt. The answer lies in the system itself. Each part reinforced the others until a relatively small American unit could create the impression of overwhelming strength. Imagine lying in a hedgerow in Normandy or a snow-covered forest in the Ardennes. You raise your head for a second and hear the sharp, rapid crack of multiple Garands. A bar begins hammering from the flank. Machine gun rounds cut through branches overhead. Mortar shells land behind your position. More bullets strike the earth in front of you. The firing does not slow. Ammunition never seems to run out. In that moment, the technical details no longer matter. What matters is the feeling that the enemy has more firepower than you can answer. That is what German soldiers noticed about U.S. infantry weapons in combat. They noticed the speed of the Garand. They noticed the mobility of the bar. They noticed the constant presence of machine guns and mortars. They noticed the confidence that came from reliable weapons and deep ammunition stocks. Most of all, they noticed that American infantry fought with a level of sustained fire that changed the balance of small unit combat. Years later, many veterans could still remember the sound, the quick succession of shots, the hard thump of automatic fire, the metallic ping of an empty clip. To those who faced it, that sound carried a simple and unsettling message. The Americans were coming forward, and their rifles were firing faster than anything most German infantrymen had ever faced.
If you want more content like this, subscribe now and comment below.